Right off the bat, though, Pastor Stowers Jr., he makes this really clear distinction between optimism and hope.
Oh, interesting.
He doesn't see them as the same thing at all. Like, it's not just about, putting on a happy face and looking at the bright side.
Right.
There's more to it.
Right.
It's deeper.
Yeah, so what is he saying is at the core of that, what makes hope so powerful?
Welcome to the Clarence Stowers Leadership Podcast, a podcast about becoming 1% better every day. And now your host, yours truly, Clarence Stowers. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Clarence Stowers Leadership Podcast, a podcast about helping you become 1% better in every area of life. And I am your host, yours truly, Clarence Stowers. I'm excited about today's episode, Finding Hope in Turbulent Times. Today's episode focuses on finding true hope not as a wishful idea, but as a firm foundation. It acknowledges the challenges of our current world, where uncertainty seems to be the only certainty. Come to the front of the class. Again, it acknowledges the challenges of our current world, where uncertainty seems to be the only certainty. Today's episode highlights how easily we can be overwhelmed by political division, unstable economy, social debates, and the spread of fear. Additionally, this episode emphasizes that we often place our hope in temporary things like political leaders, the economy, or other people. See, the core message is that hope is not found in headlines, it's found in Jesus. Your hope is only as strong as what it's anchored to. True hope is rooted in God's unshakable sovereignty. Additionally, I'll dive into Daniel. And this is not new to us because we have Daniel, who lived in a corrupt and unstable world, but did not lose hope because he trusted in God's sovereignty. See, God controls the world's events. He removes and establishes leaders and governments and is ultimately in control. Placing our hope in temporary things will ultimately lead to fear. However, true peace comes from the presence of Jesus. I'm a believer, and I hold true to that. So we need a new anchor, and that anchor is, you guessed it, Jesus. Now, if you don't get anything else from this episode, come to the front of the class. Hope in God is not dependent on political stability, economic prosperity, or social unity, but God's sovereignty. See, we anchor our hope in temporary things like governments, financial stability, the approval of others. And what ultimately ends up happening is things fail, we're disappointed. And in the midst of that disappointment, don't miss this, fear thrives where faith is absent. That'll preach right there. Fear thrives where faith is absent. Worry comes when we believe the world is in control, and peace comes when we remember that God is in control. And that's why I love the story of Daniel, because it demonstrates how we must trust God even when the world is corrupt and unstable. Daniel knew that no king or government has the final say. That belongs to God alone. So, how do you get the most out of today's episode? First, find a comfortable space, something to write with, something to write on. Grab your favorite beverage and take copious notes. I always wanted to use that in a sentence. So how do we get the most out of it? First, pray more than you panic. Remember, when fear rises, take it to God. Secondly, fix your focus on Jesus. He is eternal and he is in control. Be light in dark times. Choose faith over fear, peace over panic, and hope over despair. Fourthly, intentionally replace fear with faith. Remind yourself of God's sovereignty whenever you feel anxious. And finally, if your anchor is in Jesus, the storm can rage, but you won't drown. Now, I can't share all of this information and not ask you to do something in return. So as you dive into this conversation with today's host, here's a few things that I'd like for you to do. Reflect on where you're placing your hope. Then secondly, consider what temporary things you're relying on for stability. Third, anchor your hope in God and move from a position of fear to a position of faith. Additionally, don't let the world's uncertainty steal the certainty of God's promises. Furthermore, choose to be filled with hope instead of being consumed by fear. And remember that hope is not scarce when anchored in God. And then finally, find peace and security by trusting in God's promises and his presence. Now, before we dive into this conversation, remember, the world is unstable, but God is unshakable. And our peace is tied to God's presence, not policies or governments. Our future is secured in Jesus, not earthly leaders. Jesus remains the same no matter what happens in the world. And if you are anchored to him, you don't have to live in fear. Are you excited? I know that I am. I'll see you on the inside.
All right, let's dive in today. And, this topic, it's hope, and it feels like something we all need a little more of these days.
Yeah, doesn't it?
So we've got this incredible sermon by Pastor Stowers Jr. to unpack along with his study guide, Hope in Turbulent Times, Trusting in God's Sovereignty.
Okay.
But then we're also going to bring in something a little different, a politically charged opinion piece.
Oh, wow.
So, yeah, kind of a mix of sources here.
Yeah, that's interesting because we'll be looking at hope through so many different lenses, personal faith, current events, and even, like you said, some strong political opinions.
Right off the bat, though, Pastor Stowers Jr., he makes this really clear distinction between optimism and hope.
Oh, interesting.
He doesn't see them as the same thing at all. Like, it's not just about, putting on a happy face and looking at the bright side.
Right.
There's more to it.
Right.
It's deeper.
Yeah, so what is he saying is at the core of that, what makes hope so powerful?
Well, he's saying it's not just, passively wishing that things will get better. It's this active trust,
Right.
this deep-seated confidence that even when things look really shaky, there's this solid foundation underneath it all.
Almost like an anchor.
Exactly.
Yeah, holding a ship steady in the middle of a storm.
And he uses that anchor metaphor a lot.
Oh, wow.
Throughout the whole sermon and study guide.
Okay.
He talks about all the different things that people tend to anchor their hope to.
I see.
Like political leaders, the economy, even other people.
Yeah.
But then what happens when those things let us down?
Right, or, they ship that they're not stable.
Exactly. It's like,
What happens then?
yeah, it's like building a house on sand.
Yeah.
It looks fine until the storm hits.
Exactly.
And Pastor Stowers Jr., he points to the story of Daniel in the Old Testament.
Right.
Living in this totally corrupt society, facing exile, all kinds of threats. But his faith never wavered.
It's incredible.
It's amazing. Makes you wonder how many of us would have that kind of resilience.
Right. Right.
If we were in his shoes.
I know me, I get stressed when the Wi-Fi is down for an hour.
Exactly. It's like, it's such a powerful contrast.
It is. Think about it this way.
Yeah.
Imagine someone who works in a really high pressure job, right?
Mm-hmm.
Maybe facing ethical dilemmas.
Yeah.
Toxic boss.
Oh, no.
Do they just kind of cave to that pressure?
Uh-huh.
Or do they hold on to this deeper sense of purpose?
Yeah. Right.
A belief that there's got to be more to life than just winning on the corporate world.
Right.
That's where Daniel's story, I think, becomes so powerful.
Yeah.
Even thousands of years later.
It's so relevant. He had this unwavering, trust in God's sovereignty. You know, this idea that even in the midst of all the chaos, there's this higher power and control.
Right.
And Pastor Stowers Jr., he brings that idea right into our modern context. You know, he says, no matter how much the world changes, God remains the same.
It's a powerful perspective shift, isn't it?
It is.
Like, it's so easy to get caught up in the news cycle
Oh, totally.
and feel like everything's spinning out of control.
Right.
But if we can anchor our hope in something bigger,
Yeah.
you know, something that's beyond political parties and all the economic ups and downs, it changes how we see everything.
It does. And that's actually where this politically charged opinion piece comes in.
Oh, right.
It argues that Democrats aren't doing enough to oppose what the author calls Trump's fascist agenda.
Wow.
Yeah. It's
Pretty intense.
pretty intense.
Yeah. What's fascinating to me is that the author is calling people to action. But it seems to be fueled by like this sense of urgency or even fear.
Yeah.
So does that line up with the kind of hope that Daniel had?
Right.
Or is there like a different way to engage in politics? One is rooted in trust instead of just reacting out of fear.
It really makes you think about what's motivating our actions.
Yeah.
You know, are we just driven by anxiety?
Right.
This need to control everything? Or can we step back and see the bigger picture
Yeah.
and trust that even in the middle of all the turmoil, there's a greater purpose at work?
That's the question, isn't it?
It is, and it's a question we can all ask ourselves.
Yes,
you know, no matter what our political beliefs are, where are we putting our hope?
Right.
What's the foundation for everything we do?
And all our anxieties, too.
Yeah, for all of it.
Yeah.
Okay, so we've defined hope,
Right.
explored where it comes from, even touched on how it plays out in politics.
And we did.
But Pastor Stowers Jr., he doesn't stop there.
Okay, so what else does he say?
He actually gives us some practical advice
Okay.
on how to cultivate hope in our everyday lives.
I like that.
Yeah, so he talks about praying more than you panic, fixing your focus on Jesus,
Okay.
and being a light in dark times.
So it's about choosing hope,
Yeah,
even when everything around us is negative.
right. It's like choosing to look for the good,
Uh-huh.
to find those little glimmers of light, even when things feel really dark.
And that takes effort.
It does.
It's intentional.
Yeah, it's not about ignoring the bad stuff,
Right.
but it's about choosing where we put our energy.
Yeah, where we focus.
Do we get sucked into the vortex of fear and despair, or do we actively seek out those sources of hope and let that shape our perspective?
Right. It's a choice we make every day.
It is. It really struck me how Pastor Stowers Jr. talked about the anxieties that we face today, you know, and how they're not that different from what people were going through back in Daniel's time.
Oh, yeah.
It wasn't exactly Instagram-likes back then.
Right.
But like that feeling of instability, the turmoil, the threats to their way of life,
Yeah.
it all feels pretty relatable, you know?
Yeah. What I love is how he connects it to like our Ely Day stuff. He even talks about how much groceries cost now.
Right.
You know, it brings this big concept of hope down to earth.
Totally.
Makes it something we can all relate to.
Yeah, it's like even if our problems aren't on the scale of like exile in Babylon, that feeling that things are off, we all get that.
Right.
And the study guide even reminds us that like change has always been a constant, but it's like sometimes that roller coaster suddenly goes vertical.
Right.
And you're like, whoa.
And that's when that anchor metaphor becomes so important.
Totally.
You know, if we're holding on to something solid, something unchanging, we can handle those drops.
Yeah, with a little more courage, a little less
Yes,
panic.
exactly.
But both the Soman and the study guide, they warn us about this idea of misplaced hope.
Oh, yeah.
Like anchoring ourselves to political parties, economic systems,
Yeah.
specific people. It seems like that's just setting ourselves up for disappointment, right?
Because those things are going to change. They can fail.
Totally.
They can even like betray our trust.
Totally.
It's like the rug's been pulled out from under us.
Yeah, exactly. But what if we do what Daniel did
Okay.
and build on something more unshakable?
Like what?
Well, Pastor Stowers Jr., he reminds us that no matter how powerful a leader seems,
Yeah.
no matter how much control they think they have, ultimately, it's not their show.
Right. It's a humbling thought,
It is.
but also kind of liberating.
Yeah.
You know, when you think about
it. It is. It's like we got to zoom out
Yeah.
from all the immediate
Right,
anxiety.
the 24/7 news cycle.
Exactly. And look at the bigger picture.
The grand narrative of history.
Yeah. And I don't think he's saying we should be passive or
Right.
disengaged.
It's not about that.
It's more about recognizing our limits.
Yeah.
Like our hope, our ultimate security.
Mhm.
It doesn't come from us trying to micromanage the universe.
Exactly. It's about surrender.
Yeah.
Surrendering to a higher power.
Mm-hmm.
And I know that can sound scary to some people.
Yeah.
But Pastor Stowers Jr., he frames it as this incredibly loving God
Right.
who holds all things in his hands, including us.
Yeah. And that brings us to this concept of peace.
Okay.
He even reads that passage from John 14:27.
Oh, yeah.
Where Jesus says, I am leaving you with a gift peace of mind and heart. And the peace I give is a gift the world cannot leave. So don't be troubled or afraid.
Powerful words.
They are, but Jesus himself went through some really tough times.
He did.
So what's he really saying here?
That's the key, isn't it?
It is.
Jesus isn't promising a life without problems.
Mm-hmm.
He's saying that within those problems, we can find this deep, abiding peace.
Right. This peace that comes from knowing that we're not alone.
Exactly.
So it's not the absence of problems.
No.
But the presence of something else.
Yeah, something bigger.
Something bigger.
And the study guide gets into the nuance of the Hebrew word for peace, shalom.
Oh, wow.
It's not just about feeling calm.
Okay.
It's about wholeness, security, completeness. Every part of us is in the right relationship.
Right. Relationship with God.
With God ourselves, the world.
That sounds amazing, but also really hard.
Yeah.
Especially when everything around us is telling us to be afraid.
Right, to grab for control.
Exactly.
But remember those 3 things Pastor Stowers Jr. keeps emphasizing?
Okay.
Pray more than you panic. Fix your focus on Jesus. Be a light in dark times.
Right.
Those aren't just nice sayings.
Right, not.
They're actions.
Right.
It's about taking responsibility for where we get our hope from.
It's choosing faith over fear.
Exactly.
And it's not about ignoring reality.
No.
But it's about choosing where we place our trust.
And recognizing that even in the chaos, even in the uncertainty, God is still working, still moving, still offering us that unshakable peace.
He is. And it's there for us.
Yeah, we just got to tap into it.
When Pastor Stowers Jr. was talking about being a light in dark times, it really hit me.
Yeah.
But it's not just about us holding on to hope for ourselves. It's about sharing it with others.
Right, radiating it outwards.
Exactly. Hope becomes something we do, not just something we feel.
We become a source of stability.
Yeah.
Almost like a beacon,
Totally.
For people who are struggling.
Makes me think about those times when I've been going through something tough. And just a kind word from a friend.
Yeah.
Or even a stranger sometimes.
Right.
It can make all the difference.
Totally. It doesn't solve the problem.
Right.
But it gives you the strength to keep going.
Exactly. And the study guide even emphasizes that even small acts of kindness can have this ripple effect.
Right. Imagine you're feeling super overwhelmed.
Yeah.
And someone just offers you a genuine smile or a listening ear.
Yeah.
It might seem small, but it can totally shift your perspective.
It can. So it's not just about waiting for hope to show up.
Right.
We're actively creating it.
Yeah, spreading it around.
Exactly. Which brings us to something else. Pastor Stowers Jr. talked about communion. He calls it a relationship reminder.
I love that.
Me too. Not just a ritual.
Right. It takes it out of that formal religious context.
Yeah.
And makes it something personal.
It does. It's about intentionally centering our hearts on Jesus, reflecting on his sacrifice, and renewing our commitment to him.
And it's not about being perfect.
Right.
It's about coming to the table with an open heart.
Totally.
Acknowledging our need for grace.
It reminds me of something I heard once.
Okay. What's that?
Communion is less about what we bring to the table and more about what we receive.
That's good.
Right. It's about accepting that unconditional love and forgiveness.
Yeah, no matter where we are in our journey.
Exactly. And that feeling of being loved and accepted, that's a powerful foundation for hope.
It is.
It reminds us that we're not alone.
Right.
We're part of something bigger.
Yes, it's
family of faith.
United by our love for Christ.
Exactly. And as we wrap up our deep dive today, there's one more point from Pastor Stowers Jr. I wanted to share.
Right.
It wasn't explicitly in our sources today, but it really resonated with me.
What is it?
He talked about communion as this reminder of the blood of Jesus covering us.
Yeah.
Protecting us, empowering us.
That's powerful.
It is. It's a powerful image to carry with us as we go through life.
Right.
All the ups and downs.
We're not facing them alone.
No, we're not. We have this incredible source of strength and hope.
Yeah, to draw on.
So as we head back into our everyday lives with all the uncertainties and anxieties.
Right, all this stuff.
I want to leave you with this question.
Okay.
How might viewing communion as not just a ritual, but a relationship reminder, a reminder of that covering of love and grace, how might that strengthen your hope in these turbulent times?
Something to really think about.
It is.
Until next time, may you be filled with God's peace and hope. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive into hope in turbulent times here on the Clarence Stowers Leadership Podcast. Make sure to check out the show notes for links to all the sources we mentioned. And we'll see you next time for another fascinating look at the ideas that shape our world.
You've been listening to the Clarence Stowers Leadership Podcast. Join us next time for more insights on becoming 1% better each day and leveling up in all areas of life.